The difference between desirable and destructive ideals can be discussed. What are ideals? One practical way to think about it is that we start off in life um, inwardly small, insecure, scared little critters as kids, some more, some less, but all the same. And consequently, we are drawn to um, putting in front of us some sort of, for lack of a different term, ideal, some sort of perfection, uh, some sort of object, right? Such that we suppose that if we were to realize that ideal, our psychological problems would be solved, our psychological needs would be met, we would feel the way that we want to feel. Now, what that ideal is varies based on any number of factors, based on knowledge, what it is that I know of, which is based on what society I'm in, what the cultural norms are like, what my own capacities are like, many different things, my family expectations, my peer group. But whatever the differences may be, it does seem possible to discern that difference between ideals such as are desirable and such as are destructive. Let's give some examples and try to clarify just what is meant. What is a desirable ideal that, say, a young person can put in front of him or herself? This is what I want to be like. One thing that a desirable ideal would do would be to conduce to the potentiation of any underlying latent capacities that a person may have. If there is any way to be happy in life, that seems to have something to do with becoming more so in reality who I can be in principle. If we were to imagine what it's like to be a bird that has an impulse to fly and it can't fly because some wing issue or something like that, the bird probably wouldn't be too pleased. So just so, if we sit on a whole bunch of potential, right, and we don't use it, we don't use our mind, whatever mental capacities we have, we don't use our body, whatever physical capacities we have, we don't engage our emotions, we don't use our potential for relationship, and it's all just underneath the surface, we're not going to be happy, needless to say. Things are going to be amiss. So a good ideal brings that out. So, for example, an athletic ideal compels the aspirant to work out, to practice, to become stronger, to become more conditioned, more agile, to get up off the couch and to go do something. Right? For example, I put up on my wall a picture of a great basketball player from a basketball player, great football player from a football player, a great swimmer if I'm a swimmer. That's what I would want to be like. Maybe not that exact person, but having similar accolades, Olympic medals, professional um, accomplishments, and such. And then I can get going and potentiate my physical capacities, driven onward by this ideal. I can have an intellectual ideal. Right? Somebody likes math, they can put on their wall a big mathematician. And then math students suppose that if I were like this mathematician, then my basic life problems would be solved. Right? I would have respect, honor, I would feel accomplished, dignified, and such. So a good ideal encourages us to get busy, becoming in reality what we can be. Right? I'm here, and the ideal should motivate me to go up. Right? Further, a good ideal is one which has us try to bring out the potentials that we really do have. Right? And consequently, it's an intimate interrelation with reality. It's in touch with reality. So, for example, to go back to the bird, a good ideal for a bird such that can fly, in theory, is of the flying kind, would be to fly. But if, obviously, anthropomorphically, imaginatively speaking, a polar bear were to assume the ideal of a bird and say, when I grow up, I also want to fly like these birds here, that would be stupid of the bear. And just so for us, if I, as a little kid, think, if only I could fly like the birds, all my problems would be solved, all my peers would respect me, my parents would love me, I would feel powerful and free. Right? If only I could just fly like that eagle and soar high in the sky. That's a bad ideal because it doesn't stick closely enough to reality. No matter what the child does, he or she will never be able to fly unaided. With that said, those childish, fantastical ideals, should they convert into something real, then they can be good. For example, as a 5-year-old, I want to fly just by flapping my arms. But when I figure out that that's not possible, I convert that ideal into wanting to be a pilot, a fighter pilot, a commercial airline pilot. And then that's also an ideal, and it can also motivate me to be the best that I can be. But an ideal that is strictly fantastical, that no matter how alluring the promises it holds out are, is not in contact with reality and is not a question of drawing forth the capacities that I really do have. That's a bogus ideal, at least for me. For somebody else, perhaps some such ideal is good. Like somebody is born into a royal family and knows that one day they're destined to inherit the throne, right? If things go according to plan. It's good for them to have the ideal of a king or a queen and then to educate themselves and learn the mannerisms and statesmanship or whatever it is and all that, sure. But if I'm not born in a royal family, for me to have the ideal of one day being a king or a queen, no good, unless I plan on marrying into a family or something like this. So ideals vary depending on their applicability, should we say, varies depending on who is in question. So again, a good ideal encourages us to potentiate our latent capacities. A good ideal is in contact with reality. And further, a good ideal, ideally, is one such that will eventually, if we pursue it enough, so to say, draw us out of ourselves and make us less idiosyncratic, more objective, more universal, to so say. Meaning, if I conform my initially very malleable, very formless character, mind, also body to some or another extent, to something objective, to something sound, to something in touch with reality, then I can hope to that extent, become emotionally, intellectually, humanly mature, right? To become a real person. So a real ideal hopefully does that. If I pick an ideal, even if it's possible for me, right, and even if it does encourage me to do something, but it's an ideal that is strictly, say, in service of vanity with no out, right? My ideal is to be, specific examples are tough to give, but something that speaks strictly to pride with not much of a chance of outgrowing that pride. That's also probably not a good ideal. Something that'll keep me in a closed loop of fantasy. I have an ideal to build some kind of inner fantasy world without ever making contact with anybody else, without maybe turning that into a book series that other people can enjoy. Just I'm in my own head, spinning things up. That's probably also a bogus ideal. So we said desirable ideals and destructive ideals. That's one characteristic. Some of the characteristics of destructive ideals. Further characteristic of destructive ideals is that a destructive ideal gives us that promise, right, that a good ideal does, of solving all of our issues, of giving us, for some people, the glory, for other people, at least the peace and the security and the comfort that we desire, but without that really being possible, because again, the ideal is rooted in fantasy. And we see that that's blatantly obvious in the aforementioned example of the kid that would flap his or her arms to be a bird. And there's a million other such examples. In theory, in fantasy land, if I were to be Superman or Wonder Woman, that could solve some of my psychological or meet some of my psychological needs for safety, for security, if I can't be physically harmed, for example, for fame, for glory. But since it's impossible, that's not a good ideal unless it's converted into something real. When I was little, I wanted to be Superman or Wonder Woman. That changed into wanting to be a super soldier, and I did all of the training to become special forces. Into that changed into wanting to become a super athlete, and also I did all the training. It became something real. Right? But there are times when a person chooses such a bogus ideal and it never converts into anything real. And consequently, the person lives in service of some sort of fantasy that can never come true, that will never lead a person out of him or herself, that will never potentiate his or her capacities. And that is simply a sort of role playing. Perhaps a person says, I don't like the fact that I am human, right? I would like to be a dog. If I was a dog, that would solve all of my issues. Look how people love dogs and they pet them, and dogs are cute. I, no matter how much I pursue this quote unquote ideal, I can never be a dog. Trying to be a dog will never draw out my human capacities, presumably by definition. Trying to become a dog will never uh, enable me to overstep myself and become more objective and more of a person. It will just lead to my destruction. I'm an adult, and my ideal is to be an infant, right? Because infants are helpless and everybody takes care of them and they have no financial responsibilities and there's no expectations. So I figure if only I was an infant, all of these issues, all of this stress, and all of this clamor, it would all be solved. The problem is, I can't be an infant as an adult. It's completely impossible. I could, in theory, perhaps try to give myself enough damage to the head to reduce my thinking to that level, but would that fulfill any of the aforementioned criteria of a solid ideal? Would that make me stronger? Would that make me more powerful? Would that make me smarter? No, it would be the very converse. It would be the very definition of destruction. So that's a bogus ideal. Another example. I want to be an infant because it'll solve all of my problems. So we see that we have to be on the lookout for these ideals. And unfortunately, frequently enough, because life is very hard and our psychological problems can be very um, pressing and severe, a person picks some such fantastical ideal and kind of latches onto it. Again, if only I was an animal, my problems would be solved. If only I was an infant, my problems would be solved. If only I was a person that lived centuries ago, all of my issues would be solved. Unrealizable ideals, right? Fantasy, and yet I latch onto them and then try to quote unquote realize them. It's not actually possible, but I maybe dress up or whatever it is that I try to do, only to my detriment and destruction. And in this case, it is essential, when I have any chance of progressing, to realize what it is that I have done, or if somebody is under my care, right, then it is essential for me to help that person realize what he or she has done, to come to terms what has occurred, and to snip off my connection with that ideal. I need to solve my problems in real life. I need to pick ideals that will help me solve my problems in real life and help me be the best that I can be in real life. And fantastical ideals that can never be realized will never aid in that endeavor. So, those are some thoughts concerning the differences between desirable and destructive ideals, and we can consider them. Thank you for listening.